Okay. Right, once again, good evening everybody. Welcome to the EFDC Audit and Governance Committee meeting on the 17th of January 2022. So welcome to committee members, welcome to members, and welcome to officers. Okay, before we start, I have to read this out for you. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet or filmed and will be capable of repeated viewing or another use by third parties. If you are seated in the lower public seating area, then it is likely that the recording cameras will capture your image, and this will result in a possibility that your image will become part of the broadcast. This may infringe your human and data protection rights, and if you wish to avoid this, then you should move to the upper public gallery. I can also remind you that members to activate your microphones before speaking. Thank you. Okay, so if we start off now, please. Apologies for absence.
Councillor Morgan and Councillor Heap has apologised for his lateness, although he will attend the meeting.
Okay, did you say how late he's going to be?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay. Right. Item 3, declarations of interest. No declarations of interest. Item 4, the minutes of the last meeting on the 22nd of November 2021. For those who were here, are there any comments you have on those minutes? No comments it seems, so we move on. Matters arising. Any matters arising from those minutes? No matters arising, we move on. Okay, item number 6, the work programme, on pages 11 and 12. Do we have any comments on the work programme from anybody?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you for the work programme report. I think there's a couple of things on there, but can I just clarify where we are with the work programme, in that it seems that there's Appendix 1 shows the audits completed and in progress, and that's roughly 100 days or so of your time. But the amount of days remaining to do in the work programme is about 150, 160 days of work still to do, and we're in mid-January already. So where do we stand working toward at the end of the year, or where are we likely to stand at the end of the year about the completion of the audit programme? I do appreciate it's been a difficult year if the answer's not so good. Thank you.
We're actually talking about the work programme for the audit committee. You've jumped ahead to the progress report for internal audit.
I'm looking at audit plan monitoring, Appendix 1.
I'm on page 11.
Page 19.
Oh, I'm on page 11.
This is appendix to the report.
Tony, I think the chairman is still on agenda item 6. You're talking about agenda item 7.
Can I take that all back, Jim? Thank you. In simple terms, Chairman, will we achieve the audit programme this year? Thank you.
So if I can take this item, then I was going to start off by saying we're trying to get as much of the audit plan done as possible. I am aware that there is quite ambitious at this point. We're thinking of perhaps deferring the sort of the contract management and the contractor health and safety audits at the moment, but all the other audits are programmed in at the moment, subject to auditors being able to get in and do the work. So I would like to, but hand on heart, it's likely 1 or 2 may get deferred into next year. If I can continue going through the rest of the report. So since our last meeting, we've issued 1 report. It's a contracts and procurement one. We've given it moderate assurance. I actually asked the auditors to find out where it's not working. I didn't want them just to go in and look at a set sample of contracts and see what was there. So part of their remit was to find out where things weren't working as intended. So one of the messages coming out of this was the retention of documentation to do with tenders. So on the whole, we could find the documents, but there is a risk because they're not held centrally. When staff leave, they might not put it in the right place and things like that. So the procurement team were happy with our recommendation of centralising all of that. I made sure that the team was looking at waivers and contract extensions because there is a proper process that's meant to go through to make sure that those are happening for the best interest of the council, and it's good to see that they were, and every request to do a waiver or to do a contract extension was reasonable and there was evidence behind that. Going forward, the procurement team were again happy with the recommendations about being driven by the data. They're going to do a lot more data analysis and make sure that they're checking that processes and procedures are working and following of the procurement rules by looking at the data and doing some diving themselves without relying on internal audit. Moving on to the internal audit tracker, the numbers are still fairly high. We still have the one high recommendation relating to ITDR. I can say that we actually did a test on DR this last week, which was very successful, and that will be written up, and any lessons learnt will be learnt from that. Looking at the tracker overall, you may wonder why there are so many. So there are quite a few around sort of health and safety and the gas safety. Regarding the gas safety one, they were very ambitious with their timescales, and we did query that when we had their closing meeting with them, but they decided to plough ahead with that, but unfortunately it's come to bite them, and so they've not progressed those as quickly as they can. So we're working with them and speaking to them to make sure they are going to achieve what they need to do, because gas safety is obviously very important. On the health and safety side, I'm keeping a close eye on that. I'm a member of the Strategic Health Safety Group. We also have an operational safety group, and making sure that that framework is working as intended, giving advice and helping along where we just need a little bit of jivvying up. The other recommendations on that tracker, we'd like to see them done, but they're not causing me any headaches at this particular time. Moving on down into the report. So, as I like to remind Audit Committee, Audit doesn't just do those assurance pieces of work. We also do a lot of work in the background. People come to us for advice. We go out and connect with the rest of the business and see what's happening. So we're very much instrumental in the corporate purchase card. There's a working group. We're part of that, giving our advice and guidance on how that's going to be rolled out, working on any good practice or poor practice that we've seen within the other two councils in the shared service. Risk management is key for our whole audits, and we're part of that risk management group. I've touched on the health and safety there, so I've spending quite a bit of time having a look at that. Information governance is one of those risks that are always there, and we have the Strategic Information Governance Group and again an operational group to manage that. COVID grants, we've still got those going on. We're doing both pre and post payment checks, and then BAYS, the central government, will ask us for our assurances and the work that we actually do on that, and we make sure that we comply and give that back. And again, we're doing work on the National Fraud Initiative, also doing quite a bit of work around the decision-making accountability model to make sure roles and responsibilities and those delegated authorities are working as intended. As part of your annual programme, you review the local code of governance. This sets out how governance works within Epping. We have it benchmarked against good practice. We did do a few minor changes last year to do with coronavirus. They still stand, and therefore we're not proposing any changes there. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the corporate fraud team. So there's all the good work they've been doing. In the background over the last couple of years, we've been informally helping Harlow. They now want to talk to us about a potential shared service, and we're going to start off by doing some paid for right to buy work for them because they haven't got a tenancy fraud officer at the moment. And the last part of the report is about the annual governance statement, an important document, and it's important that you make sure that we're, as a council, doing what we said that we were going to look at or keep an eye on, and good progress has been made on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Questions? If I start with one here, in the disaster recovery item 4, page 17, you say IT disaster recovery testing has been completed. So what was the result of that testing?
So that's the that work that was finished last week, and it went well. You know, we managed to get our systems up and running with the various services that we were doing it for. There will be sort of a formal sit back and look at that, and I'll look at that and see if there's any key messages that need to come to audit committee.
So we're saying it was a success.
It was a success, yes.
Rather than a total failure.
Definitely a success.
Okay. Be nice to see that written down somewhere at this stage. I note that the item that Tony actually did an email about, the major failure in cyber attacks, and that is still going on. And from what I read about it, it's something which possibly won't be going away very shortly. And there's not a lot we can do about it, apart from make sure our disaster recovery is working properly. And we do have an off-site tape storage and everything else, so that whilst we might lose service for a day or two or whatever, at least we can go back to a restart point where we haven't lost things.
Yeah, just to say that I think over the last 18 months or so, we've done a lot of work in this area, and I think we're in a much better position than we were in, say, 18 months ago now, actually. So we have a cloud backup of all of our systems and current data as well. And we're confident as a result of the testing that we did last week that we'll be able to bring up council systems quickly in the event of a cyber attack, or a deprivation of service attack. And as I say, I think we're now in a much better position than we were when we started that work.
Is there any loss of service coverage that could be put into place? Like an alternate website, something like that?
And I think most of our systems can be operated from a cloud provider now. So if we lose physical service in this building, we can still access most of our systems now through the cloud. So that's part of the resilience that we've built into this, to our solutions now as a result of this disaster recovery testing, disaster recovery solution. So I mean, inevitably there will be some services that we can't get access to straight away. Some of the customer front-facing services, no doubt. Some of our customer access and self-serve might not be available, but we're confident that we'll get access to the data and can answer most questions quite quickly after such an event now.
In which case, are the services which we might lose prioritised? You know, the ones that we really can't afford to lose, and other ones which we can afford to lose?
Yes, and certainly we concentrated on core services to make sure that they will be available first of all.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any questions, indeed? Any other questions? Nobody? So we've been asked at the beginning of this to, let me just find where the beginning is. Note the summary of the work. I think we've noted it. Agrees that no changes are required to the local code of governance. Does everybody agree with that? Okay. And review the progress of the actions taken to address the issues. We're happy with all of that. Yes? Okay. Move on to the next item. Item 8, which is the risk management report. And we're asked to consider a comment on the risk management report attached. Item 8, page 37. I think that's Andrew, you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a standing item on the agenda that presents the Council's risk register. It has been reviewed by the officer group in December. and all the risks have been looked at and as I say, updated where things or circumstances have changed. There is only one material adjustment to the risk register from the last time the committee saw that, and that's to the housing, or risk 7, housing capital finance, where there's been considerable work undertaken over the last few weeks, months actually, in terms of developing an HRA 30-year business plan, which gives us much better understanding and much better financial model of investment and return over a 30-year time frame. So any decisions that's now taken on terms of housing capital investment can be understood in context of a financial model over 30 years, and therefore affordability and other considerations can be assessed when decisions are taken in the first place. And I think that gives us sufficient assurance to lower the risk in that particular area. All other risks remain at the same level as they were last time the Audit and Governance Committee saw it. We have just 2 risks that are in the red category, and that is local plan and climate emergency. All other risks remain stable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any comments on that at all from anybody before I make a comment? Okay. Item 4, economic development. That includes the High Street. I was quite surprised to see at a meeting Stronger Place the other day that there didn't seem to be a lot of measurement going on, although there's a measurement package which they've got from somewhere. But for instance, I think, unless somebody corrects me, the assistance on Christmas lights to I think about 5 town centres was probably done without any measurement whether the money spent on that was actually achieved anything in the way of footfall. Maybe somebody can tell me if I'm right on that.
If with your permission, Chairman, I would take issue with that. The funding of Christmas lights within a number of centres, which weren't only town centres, there were villages and as well, was made to any parish or town council who was taking action to improve their particular area. That may have resulted in additional footfall. Footfall itself is something that's very difficult to measure, particularly in a district like ours, which has multiple different centres. And we, you know, from the work that we did on the town centres, we had 6 separate town centres identified. If we add the large villages to that, that's another 4 or 5 in there. It makes measurement something that is significantly difficult. So given the cost of what we were doing there, it would have cost significantly more to put in place a measurement scheme, and therefore that wouldn't have been good value for money. Okay, but can you confirm there is measurement available for the other projects, the whole list of those projects which are going to be? So in terms of the work we've been doing with the town centres, and I'm bringing a report to Cabinet in early February actually on that. One of the things that we are doing is we're working in partnership with the town and parish councils. As I said, when I first brought this forward, it's a partnership working together. It's not the district council doing stuff to the town centres. It's not the parish and town councils doing it on their own. And it's not up to us to fund it all. So I have actually asked for going forward for those parish and town councils who have received benefit from the town centre project manager over the past year to make a small token contribution to allow us to maintain that town centre project manager next year. So effectively asking £5,000 per town centre, town or parish area centre. To part fund that town centre project manager. I think that's a great measure of whether the towns and parish councils are actually seeing value in what we're doing for them. If they all come back and say, yes, it's great, then I think we're obviously doing something in the right direction. If all of them come back and say, on your bike, we're not giving you any money, then firstly, I'm not going to be looking to carry forward a town centre project manager because it's obviously not doing what we want to do. So that's probably the best measure that we've got. We hope to have that identified before I bring forward the budget in February.
While I'm looking, anybody else with a comment? Councillor Baz? Tony? Okay, you just... I noticed on page 47, under the business continuity, under mitigation current controls, it mentions a more efficient and less bureaucratic processes. So from that I can presume we have less efficient and more bureaucracy around the place. Anybody want to comment on that?
I'm happy to comment on that one. So we did an audit a couple of years ago on business continuity and had to give it no assurance because we had nothing in place. On the back of that, we brought in a consultant. We used some grant money that we were given, and he came in and put in place all the paperwork that we needed. Now, when we've looked at it since, it is a little bit over the top and a little bit clumsy. So there is a big project taking place this year to re-look at that and see to make it better and more efficient and streamlined and less bureaucratic.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Risk management was on page 37 to 60. Okay, so we've reviewed the current risk register, and have we agreed there aren't any new risks that have emerged or should be changed? Committee? Councillor Heave, I didn't see you creep in there. Oh, sorry about
I don't think I crept in, I think I bowled in. How far behind is Qualis in terms of repaying what it's owing or what we're intending to get from it? How far behind is Qualis in meeting its income, timetable income?
I don't think, sorry, Chair, with your permission. So it's not behind in terms of meeting any of its obligations. So it's meeting all the obligations consistent with the agreements that have been reached with Qualis. There are, in terms of advancing money, some of the advances have taken longer to achieve, perhaps, than had originally been timetabled. So, but that's for the necessary developments or schemes or permissions to be in place, which is consistent, I suppose, with most new development one way or the other. So it often takes longer to get a scheme off the ground than you hope it would when you originally put the idea together. But in terms of meeting its financial obligations, it's where it needs to be.
Okay with that? So any other questions again? Councillor Heap? No. Councillor Vaz? No questions? Tony? No questions, okay. So let's move on to agenda item 9, which is the Treasury Management Strategy, including the investment strategy. And we're asked to consider and recommend for approval for full council. To consider and recommend for approval by full council the draft investment strategy, and the delegated authority be given to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the chairman of the committee to make any necessary later adjustments to the financial information as necessitated by the finalisation of the budget for 22-23 prior to preparation for the final draft strategy of the full council on the 24th of February 2022. Okay, Andrew, that's yours, I think, to say.
Chair, I'm going to pass that one over, if I may, to Chris Hargrove, who actually wrote the report. I would just say, of course, that there's a relationship between the Treasury Management and Capital Strategy and the budget that the Council is currently approving or working through the approval process, of course, which is why we ask for a delegation in the event that Council approves or varies slightly the numbers that are in the draft position, and which may necessitate a slight updating of the numbers within this report. Didn't foresee that would be significant, but we just need that delegation to make any minor adjustments that are required. And on that point, I'll hand over to Chris Hargrove, who, as I say, who wrote the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Just, if I may, through you, Chairman, just a little bit more context to add to what Mr. Small has said. I appreciate that at this last committee meeting I told members about the forthcoming SIPFA revised Prudential Code and Treasury Management Codes. And that was subsequently released just before Christmas. I think it was the 20th of December, there or thereabouts. And at that point in time, it was pretty much as expected, I believe. The only slight fly in the ointment is that they didn't, and they haven't yet issued the guidance notes for the new codes. So technically, we're unable to actually comply with the technical detail within the code. And Arling Close, our advisors, are in exactly the same position because they interpret the guidance and advise us accordingly. So on that basis, it's not been practical or possible even to produce a fully compliant Treasury Management Code or capital strategy. However, I think it, and sorry, I ought to have mentioned that SIPFA in the foreword to the two codes has actually said that that's entirely, whilst the new codes apply straight away, that it says that authorities may implement it in 23-24, achieve full implementation. So, you know, it gives the example of strategies, which is exactly what we're talking about here. And just to sort of finish off on that point, the key change, the underlying, the major change, if you like, is in the Prudential Code, and it relates to borrowing lending to invest, borrowing to invest loans, and that's the key point. That's the bit that this council has complied with since the autumn of 2020. So just to reassure members and reiterate what we've said in the past. So moving on then, item 9 then, the draft Treasury Management Strategy, including the investment strategy 22-23, beginning on page 61 of this evening's agenda. Members will recall that the preparation of an annual Treasury Management Strategy has been a requirement of SIPFA's Treasury Management Code for many years now. A draft strategy for 22-23 is therefore presented for consideration in Appendix A on pages 65 to 79. In addition, following the issue of MHCLG statutory guidance on local government investments in 2018, the Council is now recommended to also produce an annual investment strategy covering the Council's wider investment activities. A draft investment strategy for 22-23 is therefore presented for consideration at Appendix C on pages 97 to 101. The overriding position in this report presents a year ahead. In the year ahead is a further rise in borrowing activity as the Council continues to roll out its capital investment plans. Conversely, investment activity is expected to be very limited. As previously mentioned, despite a recent rise in the bank rate, should I say, both borrowing and investing continues to take place against a backdrop of historically low interest rates, and which are set to continue for the foreseeable future. As at the 31st of December 2021, the Council had just over 265.6 million in external borrowing, partially offset by just under £25 million in Treasury investments. In terms of borrowing, as covered on pages 66 and 67, the Council's capital financing requirement, or CFR as it's sometimes known, reflecting the Council's underlying need to borrow, is rising to meet the needs of the capital programme, although it should be noted that the estimated actual borrowing, even allowing for carrying a minimum of £12 million in investments, will remain below the CFR at all times. In response to feedback from this committee on the 22nd of November, requesting more detail, a full breakdown of the council's outstanding borrowing as at the 31st of December is presented in tables 3 and 4. Table 3 shows outstanding PWLB loans of 234.6 million, whilst Table 4 shows additional short-term borrowing from other local authorities of 31 million. And also, in response to committee feedback and for the sake of completeness, the latest PWLB lending rules are attached at Appendix B and pages 81 to 95 for information. In terms of investments, cash available for investments and potential returns are both low and expected to remain so for the duration of the strategy. Therefore, a minimum investment balance of £12 million is the core strategy to maintain liquidity. As with borrowing, a full breakdown of the Council's investments is presented in Table 5. The table shows that an overall total of 24.978 million was held in investments at the 31st of December, including an outstanding balance of 4.65 million on the Qualis working capital loan. And based on professional advice from Arlene Close, Table 6 on page 73 proposes a very cautious counterparty list which maintains flexibility for offices and eliminates riskier and more complex investments, whilst of course being proportionate to our currently very limited investment needs. Pages 75 to 77 set out the usual Treasury indicators against which we will report back to this committee during the year ahead, as is established practice. And to finish off, Appendix C, the investment strategy on pages 97 to 101 provides more detail on the Council's wider investments, including commercial investments, which are summarised on pages 99 and 100. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chris. Right, questions. Tony, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that this is all sort of last-minute stuff and it's very difficult to cope with it all. I don't have any problem with the recommendation 1, in that's the normal sort of report. It is complex, but we've seen that before, haven't we? I'm a little concerned, I'm uncomfortable with recommendation 2, in that is an extremely complex document in Appendix C, and it's got some very big figures in it for this council, and it's the sort of document and tables in it that have not been seen before by members, I think. But yeah, I appreciate there's a timescale for these things, but it doesn't seem quite appropriate that this audit committee of 3 members, 1, 2, 3 members, should be asked to approve such a big, important but complex document. I think it deserves a wider deliberation. I'm not quite sure how that could be achieved because of your other timetables, but I just feel uncomfortable with it, Chairman. I have had several tries at looking and understanding it, with some help from officers. But some of the more simple things in there about how the council's debt is rising and where is that debt going, is not clear to me, and I expect not clear to too many at the moment. So I think it is not probably wrong, in my mind, that this committee should be asked to approve Appendix C. And I will definitely say the same when we come to the agenda item, the next agenda item that was circulated separately. Is that agenda item 10? So I could ask questions about it, Chairman, but I don't know that they'll get us very far. But I would be unwilling to approve this document, being there's only 3 members here. It doesn't seem appropriate to me. Thank you, Chairman.
That's the mechanism for approving anyway. We don't have any other mechanism.
Well, Chairman, just to push the point, I'm not sure you've got the mechanism to approve this, to be honest, at the moment. There's not firstly, the draft Treasury Management Strategy is within your terms of reference. The others aren't at the moment.
Chairman, if I can just point out that it's not an approval. The approval of that comes down to full council. The recommendation is for this committee to recommend it for approval by full council. And I will also point out, actually, Tony, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 members of the committee in attendance. You're only down one, so you're 5/6 of attendance. So that's a good chunk of the Audit and Governance Committee. We do have to remember that Councillor Owen is actually on the Zoom call, although he cannot vote. He can still take part in the debate.
Okay, well, it's certainly correct. It says consider recommending for approval. Now, how does that change your comments? Doesn't at all. You can't recommend it for exactly the same reasons. Okay. Right, Andrew, your views.
If I may, Chair, I think it's important to recognise the distinction between what's being asked of the committee, really. And I understand independent members' concerns about level of debt, for example. But this committee isn't being asked to approve a spending strategy per se. I mean, the decisions about whether the council takes a spending decision aren't within this committee anyway. That's a consideration of council recommended by cabinet. So that the actual decisions to I know, for example, invest in the housing revenue account business model over 30 years isn't a decision that this committee is being asked to take. What this report attempts to do really is to bring that all together so members have a combined view about the borrowing, spend strategy of the organisation over the budget period, really. So it's here, in this document, really is here to try and bring that all together in one space. The danger is, when Cabinet and Council are taking individual spending decisions, they're not looking at the totality necessarily of all that's been spent to date, perhaps, or committed to date. They're looking at individual decisions at that point in time. But they're also looking at the affordability of those decisions as well, of course. So, any decision that Council takes about whether to commit to a financial scheme is based around Council's understanding of whether the Council is the right thing to do for the Council, and the Council can afford to do that. Of course, that's all based upon the professional advice that's given to Council, or this committee, of course, by the officers, and the professional advisors as well. So this is, as I say, it's an amalgam. It's an attempt to bring it all together in one space so that somebody has a complete oversight on where the Council is and what the Council is choosing to do, and the Council's overall strategy in relation to investments and indeed to capital expenditure as well. And that's what this committee has been asked to comment upon, not to approve the individual spending decisions in the first place. So I think that's a subtlety and a distinction but it's also important to make. And I don't know, hopefully that gives some comfort to the independent member in terms of what's being asked of this committee.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Baz.
Table 1 on page 66, at the bottom of columns 2, 3, 4 and 5, the figures 41.2 and 111.2 and 195.8 and 215.3. Are they all loans to be paid back? Are they loans being paid back? Page 66? 66, yeah. 666. Yeah. At the bottom of columns 2, 3, 4 and 5, those figures, are they the loans that the council have paid back?
Sorry, the borrowing position, the loans that the council's got outstanding are highlighted. Was got outstanding are highlighted on tables 3 and 4. So we've currently got 234 million, 234.6 million on table 3, outstanding loans with PWLB, and a further 31 million with local authorities on table 4. That's the council's current outstanding loans. Oh, sorry.
Yes, so, yeah, table 4. You know, that's Gwynedd Council. We have paid back, we have paid back £5 million to Gwynedd Council, and 3 million to West Berkshire Council, and 3 million to West Suffolk Council. Is that all the loans we have paid back already, yeah?
I would say that because that is short-term borrowing, so that's for cash flow purposes. So, you know, as a council, we have cash coming in, cash going out, of course. Sometimes we have more cash goes out than comes in, and so we have to take money on a short-term basis, which is for less than 1 year. And these are short-term loans, so money that we've taken on a short-term basis that need to be repaid within 1 year, usually at a fixed date to these organisations.
I would have thought you would have excluded the loans which you already paid back, you would have excluded them from the total.
I believe this is a point in time. So to give you a complete picture of how much the council owes at a point in time. So at the point in time of this report, 31st of December, these were the loans that the council had that will need to be repaid within 1 year.
Thank you, Councillor Vaz. Councillor Heap.
Thank you, Chairman. On table 3, the PWLB borrowing, the first batch of loans, are those the ones that were going to be paid back between 29 and 34? Have they all been refinanced to be later now? We were due to pay back 33 million this year, which I believe has had a refinancing event, but it looks like all of the others have done the same thing.
Sorry, by way of context, members who have been here a while will recall we took out the council took out 185.5 million as part of the self-financing arrangements in 2012. One of those loans, the vast majority of those loans were fixed rate maturities, and they're listed in the first block on table 3. None of those have matured yet. The first one matures on of that particular block, the fixed rate maturities. They're all maturity loans. Doesn't expire. Doesn't mature until September 2030. The first one in the list to mature is the variable rate loan, the only variable rate loan of 31.8 million, which is due to mature very soon on the 28th of March 2022, and we will be refinancing that as part of the wider strategy which sits around both the HRA and the general fund. We will actually be refinancing it from the general fund. So.
Thank you. My understanding was that the loans were going to be paid back between 2029 and 2034. That may be an error on my part. That was the bulk of my question. What rate do you think you're going to get on the refinancing?
The short to medium term strategy, unless things change in the next few weeks, they could do. At the moment, the plan is to refinance them through short-term borrowing, because the rates are, as you can see, the difference between table 3 and table 4. The rates are extremely competitive at the moment for short-term borrowing, and we've been advised by Arlene Close that we should initially refinance them on the basis of short-term borrowing, assuming that there's no major changes in interest rates between now and the 28th of March. And we will potentially crystallise probably the wrong word to use, take out some longer term debt, replace that short term borrowing in due course, based on the risk of the total portfolio. So for example, it's well documented in these, both the treasury management strategy and the capital strategy, that our debt could potentially rise over 400 million. Arlene Close are advising us at the moment that we could easily or comfortably, if you like, carry up to about £100 million in short-term debt, and then we ought to look at placing some of it longer term when we get to that point, so it's proportionate to the overall borrowing. We're not in that place at the moment, as you can see, so that around about 31 million in short-term borrowing. So this is 31.8 million, which would push us up to, close, taking into account other things, about 70 million. So we get to a point where eventually, based on professional advice from Arlene Close, their advice being based on movements in market rates and risks, etc., we'd then take a longer term view at the appropriate point in time. But at the moment, short term borrowing is so competitive compared to long term. It's the advice that we're taking. We're driving a big surplus this year, for example, on interest payable because of that. So it has its rewards.
Andrew.
It's one of the bigger challenges, I suppose, in treasury management policy or strategy, is trying to work out the right time to borrow, and the right term to borrow for, of course. Usually you'll pay more money. Well, at the current times when short-term interest rates are really low, you'll pay more money for a longer loan, because a loan will usually be somebody's assessment of the average rate of interest paid over the life of the loan. So the longer you go out, they tend to smooth, really, because all events are averaged out over a longer period of time. So trying to pick the right rate is always difficult. If short-term rates were high, then you'd probably find longer-term rates were cheaper, because over again a 30-year term, you'd find that the average rate of borrowing was lower than the current rate. Right now, rates are as low as they've historically been, slightly creeping up, but that doesn't necessarily impact upon the longer-term rates because, as I say, it's an average. So any short-term spike in interest cost right now will probably be averaged out over a longer time frame. Because it's such a challenging area to try and get right, that's why we use the services of Arlene Close or Treasury Management Advisors. They employ a bank of, or they certainly have access to some economists who try and second guess really what the market's going to do, what the economy is going to do over a much longer time frame than we're able to do. It doesn't mean they get it right, of course, but in such a sensitive area, because small changes in interest rates have quite large impacts over a long period of time, that we need to make sure that we're taking professional advice to make sure that our strategy is as good as it can be. And we're pretty confident, I think, really, in terms of the advice that we get from Arlene Close, in as much as it's certainly much more, they have more insight, more information, and a better view over a longer time frame than we have access to ourselves. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. When I first got elected, we owed 183. Now we're up to 400. Is there a magic number that we have to stop? Is it £500 billion, or do we just carry on regardless?
I think it's a really good question, actually, in terms of, and probably hearts is the nub of the issue, really, is how much debt is too much debt, really. I think the thing that we have to look at is each of the individual spending decisions that result in us accumulating a certain amount of debt, really. And rather than trying to look at the total and think, well, that's a big number, isn't it? I think we have to look at all of the individual spending decisions and the security or risk associated with each of those. And that's probably where the most of the effort should be spent. For example, the current debate around the HRA 30-year business plan, which is going through scrutiny at the moment and will go to Cabinet, is trying to assess what the risk is of further borrowing in terms of the housing revenue account, and whether it's affordable and what are the risks associated with those decisions. And that's what that report, and it leads to the point I was making earlier really, that's where the affordability conversation is being had in those forums. So that's where the members of those scrutiny committees, overview and scrutiny cabinet, have to satisfy themselves that they are affordable. We as officers and as portfolio holders set out the mitigations to those risks in the housing revenue account business plan, for example. It's an annual review, so further spending might not take place if something within the model has altered, which means it's not as affordable as it was going to be. A lot of the Qualis lending has added to the overall general fund debt position over the last 18 months or so, which is contributing to that increase from 180 odd million pounds to the number that you talked about. And again, so we look at each of the lending decisions that the council's taken in relation to, so what security is the council taking against those loans to make sure that that they are protected in the event of default. And that's because we've taken security over the assets that Qualis has acquired to give us the council taxpayer the greatest level of security of being able to repay those loans in the event of some unexpected event. Doesn't mean you can always eliminate risk completely, and of course you can't. The role of the audit committee is to looking at the totality of it all and saying, do we think enough steps have been put in place to protect the council as well as it can be? It doesn't mean all risks have been eliminated, because they won't be. But are enough risks and mitigations being put in place to make sure the council is as protected as it can be to deliver the overall ambitions of the council? I mean, the council could sit on its hands and do nothing, of course, and achieve nothing, and spend nothing for the benefit of residents, and be absolutely protected in terms of its current position. But that's not what the council's here to do. So it's always that judgment about how much is too much, depending upon what you want to do as an organisation. You have to marry that against what protections are in place to guard against default events, perhaps.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Heap.
Excellent answer.
Right, well, back to you, Tony, on your comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. First of all, can I repeat that I don't have any problems with the Treasury Management report, which is the item A or 1 on the agenda. I do have some issues with item 2 and 3. I mean, many councils don't have Treasury Management go into an audit committee. This council does it in this way because it does, and it has a different arena to work in. But I don't know in other councils where their capital strategies are going or where their investment strategies are going. It doesn't seem to me still to be the right place for those decisions. The audit committee is an audit committee, and the governance committee, it isn't there to take strategic decisions on sorts of things that you've just been spoken about in this committee. I think another committee of the council, the cabinet, need to, and the capital strategy and the investment strategy are things that are perhaps more facing approval to a different gathering of members. And I'm not sure that, I don't think that should impede process, because the Treasury Management is the only one that's been coming through yearly up to now, and I assume you can survive your council tax raising reports, etc., with or without a capital strategy and an investment strategy. I'm not sure, because I haven't had the ability to look that up. So I still have reservations, and I'm trying to look at it from an audit committee point of view, that this committee should do auditing. I know it does Treasury Management, and that's the way of the world here. I'm not sure this is the right place for this report to be discussed. I still believe that.
Okay, Andrew, you'd like to come back on that?
respectfully, I think I disagree actually, in as much as this is an Audit and Governance Committee, and actually the Treasury Management Strategy and the Capital Strategy are governance documents. So they're not for the decisions to spend those amounts of money. That is being done by the Cabinet or by Council. What these reports do is bring together the accumulated decisions of Cabinet and Council into one place, and to set out what the risks are really. And I think that's firmly in the governance space. Now, I would say, of course, these reports are prepared by your officers. It has my name as a Section 151 officer, saying that I am content with the strategy that Council's adopting. And the role of the Audit and Governance Committee in this space is to look at the report, to look at my assessment of that, and to decide whether they are comforted, I suppose, or reassured by the advice of officers in terms of understanding what the accumulated and collective risk is of the spending decisions which are taken by other parts of the council.
I don't unnecessarily want to have a dialogue about it, but if the reports were straightforward, simple, a few pages, I might go along with it, Chairman, but as it stands, they're very difficult to understand what's being asked.
Okay, for what it's worth, I'm comfortable and assured that the content of this report is suitable to go to Council for a full decision. Now, that's without going through every line of figures and making sure it's all within 10 decimal places correct, etc. I don't think that's our job to do that. You're the professionals, you produce this report, and I'm quite happy and say, in your words, comfortable to accept that and to go forward for approval or approval at the full council by those people there. That's my opinion. Now, what about the rest of the committee? Councillor Vaz?
Chairman, could I just make a quick suggestion, for example? If you're happy with this, I think this, and I agree with Mr. Small with the way he's laid it out. I think that is clearly part of what the Audit and Governance Committee should be doing. But it's certainly within your powers to ask the Constitution Committee to have a look to see whether they believe that the investment strategy should come to the Audit and Governance Committee in the future. And that might give the members some degree of confidence that it is actually the right place for it. And it would give you, I guess, constitutional backup that it should be part of the things that you're looking for. And the way I would suggest you do that is when you're asked to comment on this at full council on the 24th, that you put in a request that the Constitution Committee look at those reports to see whether that is something they believe should come to Audit and Governance. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Councillor Philip.
Sorry, just to add one sort of technical point, really, that to reassure the committee, the Prudential Code, the 2017 code, was the first code to introduce the requirement for a capital strategy, and it was quite clear that should be adopted by full council. And as far as I'm aware, the 2021 code, if anything, will strengthen that requirement rather than reduce it. So it is firmly a full council decision. It's very clear about that, and there's not been any change on that. Doesn't talk about the route to get there, but that's...
Okay, on those grounds then, thank you, Councillor Philip, for that suggestion, which I was going to mention T's and C's and whether our T's and C's are correct on this. But if it goes the way you say, that's fine by me. How do you feel about that, Tony? Okay, so we...
without wishing to disparage fellow councillors at full council, is there a way of making this a bit shorter and easier to understand in larger terms so that anybody wishing to delve into the detail could then do so?
Andrew, if I could suggest that maybe the right way is, rather than change the report, offer a briefing session beforehand so that you can actually take members through it, so they've actually got a bit more of information. I quite like the level of detail, particularly when it's coming to full council for an important endorsement, but at least we can make the offer for people to look at it.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just add that that's actually it's a complex subject. It's very difficult to summarise it in a concise format. In my defence, I'd say that the document is actually significantly shorter than the template that Arlene Close produced. So this is very much a shortened version of what is recommended. So.
I would say that Mr. Hargrave writes I believe, a very kind of user-friendly report. But as he says, though, unfortunately, this is a hugely complex subject. Actually, there's an awful lot going on in there, really, and there's an awful lot of issues there that have big implications for the council. So I recognise that it's a difficult report to digest, really, no matter how easily we attempt to explain it. I take on board the portfolio holder's recommendation about offering a briefing to councillors ahead of council, if that meets with the members of this committee's approval.
We approve of that, do we? Certainly, and myself, and yourself, take it. So we do approve of the presentation to councillors. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of this then. Item 1, recommendations, decisions required. Item 1, do we recommend for approval by full council, the draft Treasury Management Strategy? Yes? Yes, yes, yes. Good. Agreed. Item 2, to consider and recommend for approval by full council the draft investment strategy. Councillor Heap? Yes. Councillor Vaz?
Abstain.
Right. Mr. Giles abstaining and myself saying yes. The third item, delegation of authority to the 151 officer. Agreement, Councillor Vaz? Councillor Heap, yes. Yes, myself? Yes. So all agree on that. Fine, thank you very much. That's item 9 complete. Item 10, which is capital strategy.
Thank you, Chairman. A lot of what is in here we've discussed already, so forgive me if I repeat the odd item. Item 10A then, the draft capital strategy 22-23 to 26-27 is presented on pages 1 to 25 of this evening's supplementary agenda. The requirement, as I mentioned earlier, to produce a capital strategy has been in place for a few years now, indeed ever since SIPFA introduced its updated 2017 Prudential Code. Accordingly, this is the third capital strategy that the Council has produced, and the committee will recall considering a revamped strategy reflecting the updated capital investment plans for the Council relatively recently in March 2021. The capital strategy presented before you this evening continues with a new approach. In applying with recommended best practice, it is broad in scope whilst remaining arguably relatively concise and picks up on the Council's wider financial commitments for the purposes of added transparency and ease of reference. Before I cover the detail, through you, Chairman, if I may, I wish to highlight a small correction that is required to the report which has come to my attention. In paragraph 2.3.4, the quoted increase in the capital financing requirement in 22-23 should in fact say 69.5 million rather than the quoted 42.9 million, which just reflects the general fund element. I apologise for to members for any confusion caused. Turning to the detail then, which is contained in Appendix A of the report on pages 6 to 25. Section 2 on pages 7 to 9 presents the Council's current and emerging capital programme as presented to Cabinet in December 2021. Covering both the General Fund and the Housing Revenue Account, it's a large programme, beginning with planned spending of 93.6 million in 22-23 and totalling 293 million over the next 5 years up to and including 26-27. The delivery of the programme will require an increase in external borrowing, which is forecast to rise over the next 3 years to reach 487.7 million by March 2025, as presented in Table 7 on page 12. It is, however, important to note the comments of the Section 151 officer in Section 8.2 of the report, especially important given the foregoing discussion around here this evening. The report on pages 20 to 21, where consideration is given to the prudence, affordability and sustainability of the programme. Wider topics considered in the capital strategy include the Council's approach to asset management and treasury management as covered on by agenda item 9 this evening, service investments, commercial investments, financial guarantees and the way in which the professional capacity is maintained throughout the development, and maintenance of knowledge and skills, and the selective use of professional advisors. And finally, for completeness, Annex A of the strategy on page 25 includes the proposed minimum revenue provision policy for 22-23. It's unchanged since this committee adopted the previous policy in November 2020 and further endorsed the approach in March 2021. And complying with legislative requirements ensures that the Council acts prudently in setting aside funds to meet the repayment of principal on loans taken out on the General Fund. Moving forwards, the capital strategy will continue to be regularly updated in accordance with the Prudential Code. The 23-24 version will of course be prepared in accordance with SIPFA's very latest, in other words the December 2021 Prudential Code, as I mentioned earlier. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Okay. Tony, considering what you said in the last document, presumably you have the same view for item 2 on this one as well. Exactly the same. Good. Okay, members, then, any comments at all? Councillor Heap?
Thank you. I didn't even have my hand up. No, not really. Just that we've now got a debt that's equivalent to South Africa's GDP.
Just as well or more efficient.
Sorry, it might be helpful, Chairman, in the view of the earlier discussion, just to sort of cut through some of the jargon in here, perhaps. There's various tables and mandatory prudential indicators that we're required to produce by the code, but I mean, stitching it all together, if you like. If you take Table 7, which is the forecast borrowing level on page 12, you'll notice that the outstanding forecast borrowing requirement, external borrowing, is 487.7 million. That includes the presumption of holding £12 million in cash for investments and maximising internal borrowing. So that, in accordance with the prudential indicator, is technically, as in accordance with the 2017 code, the lowest risk form of borrowing. And if you match that against the capital financing requirement and the actual authorised limit for total external debt on table 8, you'll see that that's 546, virtually 547 million. So what that's saying is that basically that's the maximum that we're asking to borrow. In reality, that this is the maximum allowable amount to borrow, if you like. In reality, we will be well within that limit.
I was going to say, really, the two reports overlap significantly, really, in terms of the same issues are at play within both reports, and they're almost one report within two sections, actually, if I'm honest with you. So I think a lot of the points that we had or were made in the previous item actually relate equally to this item. So probably I think that I wanted to say has already been said.
Good. Right, we'll go back to the questions then. Councillor Heap, you've completed, I think. Councillor Vaz. Councillor Owen. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Right. Also, just a little bit concerned about the debt levels. It would be good to understand more around the affordability of the debt levels as well. I think just to see the debt levels rising and rising is never good, but can the council actually afford it? One assumes they can. So something around the affordability metrics along with the debt would be quite interesting to see.
There are some indicators or some affordability indicators already within there. For example, there's a loan to value indicator for the HRA debt, and I think there's something similar for the general fund as well. Both to give assurance, I suppose, that the level of interest cover is there on the loans, so that they don't impact upon service delivery, and that there is enough cover within the housing revenue account and the general fund to make sure that the interest repayments can be covered without, as I say, detriment to service delivery.
Just coming back on that though, whilst of course interest coverage is always great, we're also looking at capital repayment. How's the debt growing? You know, how are we eventually going to repay it? Because back to Councillor Heap's point, what is the end game? It would be good to get some sort of end game on this. You know, we need to make sure we can ultimately repay it over years and years and years, maybe inflate it away or something, but what is the end game on this?
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things to emphasise in this is that a large proportion of the council's borrowing is actually in what's known as EIP loans in the trade, so equal instalments of principal. So it's like a repayment mortgage, if you like. So we've got, sorry, I'll contradict myself slightly here. The earlier stuff that was taken out for the housing revenue account was predominantly maturity loans. But since then, most of the borrowing that we're undertaking is EIP, what is known as EIP loans. So we are repaying a lot of this stuff as we go along, and indeed it mirrors the loans to Qualis as well, which are predominantly EIP loans. And we also set aside for repayments of principal through the minimum revenue provision on top of that, which is outlined, sorry, above that, to repay, you know, general outstanding debt on the general fund, which is outlined in the report.
Andrew?
I was going to make the point about minimum revenue provision, which Mr. Hargraves already mentioned, in fact. So that's a statutory requirement upon each council to make provision within their annual budgets to physically repay debt outstanding. So MRP is essentially that. So there's a statutory obligation on us to make provision in the revenue account to repay the loans. So there's always an end game in terms of making sure that debts are repaid. It doesn't mean you don't take out more loans in the meantime for other purposes, of course, but always you're measuring affordability year on year, and that's when that comes into the overall budget equation and the budget setting process as well, and is reported through mechanisms such as this.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions from any of the members? No? No? Tony? None for myself. Okay, let's go back to the recommendations. Item 1. Agreement? Agreement. Yep. You abstain from item 1? Yeah, that's the consider a recommendation for capital strategy. You're okay with that one, the last one. It's item 2 you disagreed with. Different report. Okay. So you're sorry. Yeah, you're objecting to not objecting, abstaining from item 1. Okay. Item 2. Presumably you're happy with that, and the same with the other 2 members here. And item 3. Again, presumably we're all happy with that. Okay. Thank you very much. Right, the next item on the agenda is item 10, any other business? Any other business? No other business. Item 11, exclusion of public and press. We go straight past that. And I think that is the end of the meeting. So I'll close the meeting at 8:16. Thank you.